President Biden will soon head to Europe for a 5-day trip highlighted by the annual NATO summit. One agenda item remains TBD, whether to expand the group's membership, after President Biden hosted Sweden's prime minister yesterday. Joining us now from the White House, National Security Council spokesman and retired Rear Admiral John Kirby. Admiral Kirby, thank you for taking the time to be with us this evening. What is the state of Sweden's push to join NATO? What's your assessment?
Well, the president remains optimistic that they'll get in, that they will be the 32nd NATO ally to join, and we're looking forward to that. Very capable military. What I can tell you is that discussions are ongoing between Sweden and Turkey, and of course with Hungary as well. We're glad to see that that dialogue is continuing, because that's a good sign. It means that they're beginning to try to work through some of these differences. I will let those countries talk to what those differences are and how close they might or might not be. But the president remains, as I said, very optimistic that Sweden will join.
What about Turkey? Where do they stand in terms of their opposition to Sweden joining?
Well, I think President Erdogan has been very public about his concerns. In particular, he mentioned, just in recent days, this protest in Sweden, in Stockholm, where a Quran was burnt. Obviously, we find that offensive as well. But Sweden also said they found it offensive. But they also have freedom of speech that they have to protect. We understand that here in the United States. The president is grateful that President Erdogan and the Prime Minister of Sweden, who, as you know, was just here today, are continuing those conversations, and we want that to occur.
So, Admiral, those conversations are ongoing, but President Biden's someone I started covering when he was vice president, and he would often come back to his old haunting grounds, the U.S. Senate, where he was chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He has so much experience on the foreign policy front. What can he do in the coming days when he heads to Europe to try to nudge this along without getting in front of these ongoing conversations? That's
exactly right. He's going to want to respect these conversations and that dialogue, and he's going to want to make sure that the parties all know that he's respectful of their ability to work this out together. But of course, he will talk to allies and partners across the realm of the alliance about the importance of Sweden joining, how much capability they'll be able to bring to NATO's military operations and training events, and he'll continue to encourage all sides to have that dialogue and work these issues out.
If you're an American who's not paying close attention to foreign policy and you're watching this and wondering, well, why does it matter if Sweden joins NATO or not? You said it's important. What's the importance in particular with the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine? Why would Sweden's inclusion in NATO be a factor there, if at all?
Well, the first and most important reason is just that they're a very strong, capable military. This is a military that the United States military trains with, understands. We know them well. They definitely have powerful and modern capabilities that they can lend to the alliance, whether that's in defense, air defense, air capability, maritime capability. I could go on. And so this is a very modern military who really could lend a lot more capability and readiness to the alliance at a time, and this is the most important part, Bob, at a time when the security situation in Europe has changed. Not will change, not is changing, has changed. And we are all trying to devote as much energy as we can. And you'll see this discussed in Vilnius on bolstering that NATO's eastern flank. Now that Mr. Putin has now invaded Ukraine now for 16 months, that eastern flank and the security along that eastern flank is even more important than it was before. And Sweden is right there at the northern edge of that eastern flank and will be able to add capability to it.
Beyond the issue of Sweden joining NATO, what's another priority on the agenda for the president as he heads to Vilnius?
I say there's really three, Bob. One is making sure that as allies we stay united and resolved in supporting Ukraine in the fight that they're in, this counteroffensive that they're doing right now. And as you and I speak, there is vicious fighting all along that front. We need to make sure that we're all seeing it with the same sight picture and doing everything we can to continue to support Ukraine. Number two, it's having a robust discussion with allies and partners about what the long-term defense needs of Ukraine are going to be when the war is over. Now, this is something that Secretary Austin at the Pentagon has been talking about for many, many months. It's important that the allies begin to resolve themselves around what those kind of commitments are going to need to be, because no matter how or when this war ends, Ukraine's going to have a long border with Russia that they're going to need to protect against. And number number three, and this is no less important, we just kind of touched on this a minute ago, is making sure the alliance stays ready for the changed environment that is on the European continent, making sure that as an alliance we're doing all we can to include defense spending to make sure that that eastern flank stays strong and resilient.
Speaking of how this war could end, what do you make of the recent report that former U.S. national security officials were having conversations with Russians about the makeup of a possible deal to end this war? Is it true, that recent report from NBC?
Well, I can't speak for these private entities. It's not surprising to us, and we are aware that certain private entities and individuals have had discussions on their own, without our active participation or our support with Russian officials. They should be able to speak to that. That's certainly within their purview. Sometimes we get informed about these things after the fact, get a readout of it, but I want to make it clear that these discussions were not encouraged or engendered by us, and we were not supporting them in any active way. As the president has said, nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. That they have got to be at the forefront of any negotiations or discussions with Russia to end this war. And we are working hard to see if we can actualize President Zelensky's 10-point peace formula for a just peace. We're working hard directly with the Ukrainians and our allies and partners on that. And again, I think that will be another topic of discussion in Vilnius.
Has the United States had to do anything, even President Biden himself, to reassure the Ukrainians after this report about where this all stands?
I'm not aware of any direct communications that we've had to have with Ukraine since this press reporting that just happened here today. But again, we've been very clear privately and publicly with Ukrainians, and they understand that we will not engage in negotiations to end this war without them at the table and without their perspectives being front and center.
And on this issue, when do you believe those negotiations to end this war could begin? What's going to need to be accomplished in terms of an agreement between Russia and Ukraine on the terms of a discussion to get to that point, a formal discussion?
I wish we knew the answer to that one, Bob. I think it's really going to come down to what President Zelensky's comfortable with. He's got to be ready to sit down and have a discussion with President Putin about ending this war, and he's not right now. I mean, his forces are engaged in a very active fight from Donbass all the way down to Kherson. I would also add, importantly, President Putin shows no sign of being willing to sit down and have any kind of dialogue with the Ukrainians about ending this war. In fact, quite the contrary. Just over the course of the last few days, raining down drones and missiles again on Kyiv and other places in Ukraine, hitting civilian infrastructure, killing civilians that are just simply innocently trying to live their lives. And of course, his forces are still in fighting along that defensive front, all along that border, all along that front line. So Mr. Putin has shown no indication of being willing to negotiate. So it could be some time, and it's very difficult to be able to put a timestamp on exactly when that could happen.
Just final thing here, Admiral. You say the Russians continue to be aggressive in terms of fighting the war, but Putin has also faced internal threats in recent weeks. Has that in any way changed the dynamic about when Putin could be willing to try to negotiate an end to this war?
If that's true, we don't know it. It's difficult to say, based on what happened a couple of weeks ago, to say specifically that that's going to have an impact on a negotiated end of this war. We're not seeing that. There was no movement of Russian units as a result of Mr. Prigozhin's activities. They all stayed. All the Russian forces still stayed in Ukraine, still maintained their defensive positions. There was still active fighting going on. And there's been no discernible change to operations inside Ukraine based on what Mr. Prigozhin did. So it'd be difficult to say that is some sort of harbinger of a nearer end to the war.
Well, we'll hope to check back with you on all these issues soon. National Security Council spokesman and retired Rear Admiral John Kirby, thank you for your time.
Yes, sir.